welcome to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with marketplace founders and leaders as guests for our group chats every Tuesday. This is episode 14, and I'm excited to welcome on Brandon Werber, who's currently the founder and CEO of Airvet. So if you're not familiar with Airvet, it's a telemedicine platform for pets, and they recently announced the close of their $14 million Series A round a few weeks ago. So it's quickly growing as a marketplace, and I'm excited to jump into it and chat with Brandon. So Brandon, maybe before we get started talking about the Airvet story, if you could share a little bit about your background and how you got into marketplaces, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, firstly, appreciate you having me on here and sharing a little bit more about me and Airvet and my crying, screaming baby in the background. It's been a fun last 90 days. So yeah, I'm from LA. Born and raised, went to USC, so I'm as LA native as it can get. I grew up in the pet space. So my father's actually a veterinarian and has been for almost 40 years. So I grew up in the pet space. Never thought I'd be building businesses in the space, even though I've loved it. I always thought it would be more of me becoming a vet and kind of getting the business passed down. But I ultimately didn't go the veterinary route and went more the entrepreneurial route. So a little bit of background to me, I did because I'm from LA. I did what everyone else in LA does, and after college, I went into entertainment. And and you almost feel like this just you got to do it. So I started working at Fox when I was at USC, and I tried the studio side out, which I actually really enjoyed. Then I went into management and I worked at a company called Principato Young. And after that, went to what's a lot of people know as CAA, and with the agency route to try to become the next Ari Gold on Entourage. And after a couple of years doing that, ultimately started my first business, which was called Lutzi, and we built loyalty programs for anywhere from mobile games to large enterprises like Disney and Coca-Cola. And when Airvet, the opportunity for Airvet came along, was really interesting. And that was my first soiree into true marketplaces. So I kind of fell into it by being from the space and having an interesting opportunity. And when COVID hit, it was extraordinarily bittersweet. Obviously, a pretty terrifying time that we're in and still very much are in. It gave huge tailwinds, not just for Airvet, but for the entire telemedicine virtual care industry, both human and pet alike. I'm sure you guys have seen Teladoc's stock, which has been skyrocketing through the pandemic. So that's how I got into marketplaces, and Airvet's my first true marketplace business.
Nice. Thanks for sharing more about that. So maybe to take a step back, so what were like the earliest days like, maybe even like the idea stages when the idea for Airvet kind of presented itself, or maybe when you realized that, hey, this was something that you're going to pursue?
Yeah, so we had an interesting beginning in a sense. So my father and I were kind of getting together to try to figure out this space and how different it was from human telemedicine. So in human telemedicine had, even before COVID, 90% of human medical platforms. So whether you're Kaiser Permanente or even like Anthem Blue Shield and Blue Cross, and so insurance companies and medical practices, about 90% already offered or were building a telemedicine platform. So it had really vast exposure in that space. But in the pet space, it was like 1%. So we tried to understand, like, why is there such a disparity between the two? When you look at the primary demographics for telemedicine, it's typically a millennial, right? Broadly speaking, let's just say 18 to 40. But 60% of human healthcare costs come from people over 55, right? So not the primary demo for telemed, but you look at pet, right? The largest segment of pet owners, millennials. The fastest growing, millennials. The highest spending, millennials. So why were we at such low adoption? And so that kind of it was the impetus for what we were going to try to build. So we tried to understand why that was. And then through my father and some friends of his from the industry, what we found was that even though telemedicine platforms in the pet space existed, they were all very vet focused. But this is a consumer driven industry, right? Pets is very consumer driven, but nobody was really building any tools for the consumer. It was all very SaaS, not a marketplace. So we were actually, and are actually, the first and only pet telemedicine marketplace that exists, where not only do we partner with vet hospitals and chains and buying groups and distributors and all of that, but we also can completely separately and independently partner with or acquire pet parents, and any pet parent in the country can download and use Airvet 24/7. So that's where it started. The idea is us getting together to try to figure out, why is adoption like nothing in this space? Why is nobody building tools for the consumer? Why is nobody looking at this as a marketplace? So that's really where the crux of the idea started, is just trying to understand how you have 90% adoption in human, but 1% in pet, right? When the primary demo for Telemed is much more geared towards pet, and it was just not being looked at as a marketplace. It was just very, very vet driven.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So what were the next steps like, maybe to, initially kind of build your product and the initial kind of marketplace?
Well, for us, it was early. We had to make a decision when it like most marketplaces, you have a supply side and a demand side, and what do you go after first? Yeah. Right. And that's the chicken and the egg that we all have to make that decision, and it's a bit different for every business of what the right answer is. So we had to think, what would be worse to have all this demand, but no vets. So people are waiting 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours to get their questions answered or calls connected? Or would it be better to have a bunch of vets and have volume on demand low, but ultimately grow over time to become more and more? And what we found was, we would much rather have a whole bunch of vets on the platform and then go out and grow the demand side. So that's what we did. And that's what the early days for us were really like, is making sure that we were staffed on the supply side. So we don't hire vets. We partner with hospitals. Each hospital has 3 to 5 vets on average. And then they would use it for their own telemedicine with their own clients, right? Because the average vet has 800 plus clients per vet. So they would use it with them, but also those vets become our supply. So they can, like an Uber driver, they can swipe on to be part of Airvet's network, right? Answering questions and calls from the consumers and from the demand side. So that was early on. That's what we had to figure out, this kind of supply versus demand, chicken and egg. And that's the route that we went. So that's what the earliest days looked like, is us just trying to figure that out.
Nice. That's sounds like a great approach. So how like, what stage was that at, as far as, your approach to initially kind of partner with an onboard supply, and then in turn, for them generating demand? Is that something you still do today, as far as like that tactic? Or
Yeah, we have not been, we haven't really spent any money on the demand side yet. So that's a lot of the reason that we raised the Series A now, was to have enough dry powder to go out and acquire for the demand side. So the demand side grew just by itself. It was growing really nicely. And when COVID hit, it was phenomenal. I mean, we were, onboarding thousands and thousands of new pet owners a week with no marketing at all. And then we started realizing, hey, we can kind of take our time here and go out and do and then go big on the consumer side. Because we have over 3,000 vets on the platform now. So now we have so much supply, we have to shift our attention to demand. So that was at the earliest stages, and we're kind of still at the tail end of that very equation.
Oh, wow. And so just so we can get a sense as far as like the timeline, your Series A, at what point was that in the company?
We had really only launched out of beta like end of Q4 2019.
Wow.
So it was very early. We had no plans on doing a Series A that early, but when COVID hit and the business and the just telemedicine, there was just such a spotlight on it and really big tailwinds. We were getting approached by so many VCs. I mean, even private equity firms, we were just getting approached left and right. we thought to ourselves, hey, go big or go home kind of thing, right? If
Yeah.
we're really going to do this, there's no better time. There's probably a pretty finite window of being this relevant, for pet owners and veterinarians. So that was still very early stages and early days for us to do an A.
Nice. And then what was the kind of team makeup like right before your Series A? Maybe?
Right before the A, we had like 7 or 8 people on the team. It was mostly engineers. So it was 4 or so on the engineering side. So we had one back-end person, one Android person, one iOS person, a designer, a UI UX designer. And then we had a couple account managers and myself. So we didn't have anybody on partnerships or growth or marketing or anything like that. It was a very functional team of just like making sure the product worked and that people who used it were supported. But that's what it looked like. I mean, it was a pretty scrappy team, and only one engineer per platform, one back-end engineer. Now we have like 23 people. Over the last few months, we've hired a lot and plan to be around 40 or 50 at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So early, what was hard for us was everybody wore so many hats, and I guess I shouldn't say it's hard for us. I think it's hard for every single early stage startup where everyone wears so many hats, and you have such big vision for all the things you want to do and build, and you've got so much client feedback. Hey, you should have this, or we'd love to have an integration with this practice management system, and whatever it is, you want to do it all. You want to say yes. But I think the biggest early lesson that I didn't do very well then that I am improving on and spending a lot of time thinking about now is prioritization, because you have so few resources. You have to become a ruthless prioritizer, and I still struggle at it, and I work really hard on doing better around prioritization. But if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And I think only after you've felt that pain can you really look in the mirror and say, okay, I've got to be better there. I've got to be ruthless.
Yeah, nice. And then, so speaking a little bit on the product side, so I believe you guys have it's primarily native app, right? And you have Apple and Android.
Yep, we have iOS, Android. On the vet side, we have desktop as well, and then we're building desktop for the consumer side too.
Got it. So could you maybe speak to, as far as like on the product side, like how it evolved, as far as like the stages, like early on, is that like a desktop experience for for the provider side, and then more of on the demand side that was native, or how did that kind of evolve over time too?
So it was actually mobile only for both sides before. And so it was a mobile app for the vet, like Uber has an app for the driver, app for the rider. Ours is exactly the same. We had an app for the vet, an app for the pet owner, and there was no desktop experience at all on either side. That was probably a mistake. Veterinarians are typically used to functioning off of their desktops. We thought it would make more sense to kind of modernize that and have them be more accessible, because that's what telemedicine is all about, is access. And it's very, very mobile, right? So even in the My UCLA Health app, which I use, like their telemedicine, they do it a lot through mobile, and it's hard on a desktop, because as a vet, if you want to like show someone the inside of the ear of the dog or the rash, or on the other side, it's hard to do that on a desktop when you lift your like German Shepherd up and like put them over. So mobile made more sense. And that's where it started, and probably not as quickly as we should have, but definitely relatively quickly realized that if we wanted the hospitals to have full engagement with their staff, you can't bypass the receptionists, the CSRs, the technicians, and they don't have the app. The app's just for the vets. So getting the entire staff involved would require a desktop experience. So we just launched that a few weeks ago. But that's how it evolved. And it was just mobile only first.
Got it. Yeah, I was kind of curious as to how they would actually kind of use that, in person for the actual, consulting or whatnot. But.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes things that make the most sense aren't the best way to go about it, because I
Yeah.
think a lot of partner user behavior in general just doesn't make sense. So I wouldn't a feedback I would give to myself is, in hindsight, I probably would have gotten more feedback on the channel and delivery mechanism for the vet hospitals and talked to more of them to figure out what they would use more, instead of looking at what made the most sense and then
Mhm.
building that.
Nice, nice. So also speaking on that note, how embedded are you with the industry as far in speaking with supply on like the day-to-day side?
You mean with like the hospitals and all that?
Yeah.
Um, it depends on the partner and how they look at telemedicine.
Uh-huh.
So we have hospital partners in just one hospital that are doing 500 to 800 cases a month on Airvet alone.
Oh, wow.
So we have extraordinarily embedded hospitals and partners, and then we have others that are doing 5 or 10 a month. It's more of like they do a few rechecks, and there's reasons for that are probably product limitations,
Mhm.
and become, as we get more and more robust, like with desktop and things like that, we'll see those numbers grow. But it also depends on how good of a job we did in onboarding and training and support, and getting them to understand all the different ways telemedicine can be used, because you could pick two hospitals out of a hat, and they'll ask them both, what are your goals with telemedicine? And they'll have different goals, even though it's the same platform.
Yeah, yeah. So on that too, I mean, how much are you having to almost like educate, the industry on the benefits of telemedicine?
A ton.
Uh, a ton. Yeah.
A ton. Even though we went from basically 1 to 2% adoption pre-COVID to like 50% adoption in 90 days, which I don't think there's been a single technology in the history of veterinary medicine, or even medicine at just broadly human as well, that's gone from basically no adoption to 50% of vets in the country, or doctors in the country, using that in 90 days. It's
Yeah.
just never happened. It was extraordinary. Um, but that doesn't mean they learned it and all about it in 90 days. They just went from, I don't really care about this thing, it's the future, but hey, the future's far away, right? I could just keep doing things the way that I am, to holy crow, like, if I don't have telemedicine because we have to close down, like, we'll have no way to treat our clients. So we
Yeah.
have to do it. So there's that question of, you have to do it, and very specific use cases you need to do it, but do you
Mhm.
fully understand its value? Because it was so quick. So it was and remains a huge educational barrier of getting partners to understand the full value of just telemedicine in general, not necessarily even Airvet. And I think it's going to stay that way for some time, where education is going to be a big priority.
Yeah. No, definitely. So I did have a question I wanted to ask, which is as far as on the monetization side for you guys, can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So we right now it's pay as you go, right? So you make as a consumer, we have a bit of a I would say complex, but it's really just like it's a marketplace. So there's a two-sided revenue model as well. So for the consumers, it's just $30 a call, right? Every call also lasts typically 3 days. So the first and initial connection is typically a 5 to 7 minute like video chat with a vet, but we don't stop it there. We keep that case open for 3 days so they can continue to communicate via chat for 3 full days, sending pictures, videos, updates, follow-up questions back and forth. So it's really $30 for a case, and
Mhm.
that case can have multiple touch points. I'm sure you've been in a situation, you're talking to a doctor or you're at the doctor, and then when you're on your way, I'm like, oh crap, I forgot to ask them about that
Yeah.
other whatever. So we keep that open so you don't feel like you're just paying $30 for like 5 minutes, right? So it's a big
Nice.
perceived value item for us. And on the vet side, the vet pays a SaaS fee every
Mhm.
month they use with their clients, and then we take a cut of every consult that they do on their vet.
Nice, nice. And has that evolved a lot since since COVID or?
No, not really. It's evolved a little bit. We went from taking a percentage to taking a flat fee.
Yeah.
So it's still evolving. And then also we're thinking a lot about subscription modeling on the consumer side. as well.
Nice.
So instead of paying as you use it, just some type of monthly fee that you pay, and you get X, Y, and Z more within the platform, more value from it versus just pay as you go.
Nice.
So now we have to figure out what that value is.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, yeah. I mean, how are you thinking through that?
So for us, it's really kind of similar to what I mentioned a second ago. We have to figure out what people find value in, and then see if that's something we could build in. So I know people find value in community, right? So if you look at like Facebook groups, right? The French Bulldog enthusiast group, and now I just realized this is being recorded, so everyone is going to know that I'm in the French Bulldog enthusiast Facebook group, so it's not a secret anymore. But I do love Frenchies. And I mean, it's crazy. I mean, there's, 100,000+ people in each Frenchie group, and there's hundreds of Frenchie groups. I mean, it's insane. And people ask, whether it's medical questions, behavior questions, hey, crate training questions. Should I do it? Should I not? What's the best way? And then just like silliness of just like, people love talking about their pets and others. People will just like post a picture of their puppy and say, hey, I'm just got this puppy. What, some recommendations on names. And it's like 800 responses of like, I mean, it's crazy. People love that. So if that's where people are going, how do we capture that essence and build it into the product? And for people who subscribe, get that sense of community versus someone who's just, pay as you go. So we're trying to figure that out now, and what people what perceived value there would be in these things that would make people want to be part of a community.
Got it. Nice. And then, so from on let's just say on the demand side, right? So say I want to speak with a vet, and I had that kind of like initial consultation. And then like the 3-day kind of period. Do you also kind of is there any other potential kind of transaction that might lie within that kind of the actual experience on Airvet? Or
so we're thinking through that as well. So we're building in like pharmaceutical. So you can actually send a script for a prescription, fill it, pay for it, have it shipped all through Airvet, have it delivered to your door same day or next day, so without having to leave the house. So thinking through the entire demand side experience, right, outside of the consult, it doesn't stop there, right? So we think a lot more holistically of how much of that experience, that's more of a horizontal experience as a timeline, right, start to finish. How much of that can we own, or how much of it can we take off the plates of a veterinarian? There's so many things that they're doing that if you would ask them, like, do you want to be doing those things? They'll say no, but what are my, what are my options? And Chewy came and took a big chunk out of the prescription market, created a lot of price transparency. So veterinarians used to have bigger margins on pharmaceuticals, and now people can just say, oh, you know what, doc, you said $58 for the Keflex, like it's on Chewy for 31. So just write me the script, I'll get it through Chewy. So there's all this price transparency now, and GoodRx does similar things, and they're a cool company. Figuring out if that margin's diminished, right? How can we create more value for the demand and supply side for what we're doing? And I think that's what it's all about for marketplaces, is constantly reassessing the journey of both sides and asking yourself what are the points where that they're getting value, and how do we deliver value to them in more and more places along the way, which is a different question, I think, than like what's cool or how much can we own. I'm trying to choose that based on where we can add value at different touch points along that journey.
Nice. And then something else I was going to ask about is as far as regulation, within the industry or like accreditation or whatnot. I'm not as familiar, of course, with as you are. But are there any kind of challenges that you face with that?
So the one extremely lucky thing that we have is we don't have HIPAA compliance in the vet world. So we have a lot more freedom to do certain things without, spending an exorbitant amount of money for every single thing that you do or store or track or product or service to go through legal and HIPAA regulations. So while we don't have that, we do have other regulations like how the veterinarian client patient relationship can be formed. And that's evolving as well because of COVID. And it's tough to keep track of because it's actually regulated state by state. So in every single state, they're evolving differently and in different paces. So and that's overall is looked at from the what's called the AAVSB, which is the American Association of Veterinary State Boards. So we just brought onto our team the president of the AAVSB, who joined our team to help us stay really close with how that's evolving, which would be my biggest piece of advice for any other marketplace is for all the things that you don't know, you could either learn it or bring someone on the team that knows it and is an influencer and KOL there. That's the weighing. So all the things I don't know, I can choose. I could take 3 months and dive into this myself, or I could bring somebody on who's a KOL there, and have them join. So we were really lucky and we were able to get him on board. But it's the Wild West, man. Like COVID has changed everything. States are rapidly evolving what they're allowing, and I think on the human side as well. So it's tough to stay up to speed, but that's how we're doing it.
Nice. And then so you mentioned as far as the regulation by state on a state level. So do you guys think about, as a marketplace, kind of typically a lot of marketplaces, constraining themselves to category and or location, since it is virtual and it's telemedicine, do you kind of think about either supply or demand as grouped, based off location, or any constraints around that, or like?
So it depends. It depends what the constraints are, and what we look to do. So I think taking a small step back, separating telemedicine from telehealth, because they're two different things. So telemedicine implies that you have a pre-established veterinarian client-patient relationship. Typically, you're talking to your own vet, right? In that case, you could treat, prescribe, diagnose. You could do anything virtually as you could do in person. But if you're a pet owner and you don't have a vet, like 50% of pet owners don't have a vet, or you have one, but they're not using telemedicine or they're not using Airvet, and it's 2 a.m. and your dog is sick, and you need answers, right? You want to talk to a vet, right? That vet typically that you talk to could be in any state, because that's now telehealth, right? You're just talking to a random vet. So that they typically, there are edge cases where you can, and loopholes, but they can't prescribe, treat, or diagnose, but they could advise, they can guide, they can provide triage, support, education, basically letting you know, yes, this is an emergency. You should go to an emergency right now, or no, don't worry about it. You can wait till tomorrow, go see your normal vet. That's telehealth, and that can transfer across state lines. So for telemedicine, yes, we have to make sure that when we partner with hospitals, we train them on how to use it given the restrictions within their state. But for telehealth, we're very lucky in that I could be a pet owner in Birmingham, Alabama, and talk to a vet in Portland, Oregon. And so we have vets in almost all 50 states anyway, but it wouldn't need to be.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for the breakdown on that. So.
Yeah, it is the Wild West.
Yeah.
That's for sure. But yeah, that's how we think about it. So location and proximity for our direct to consumer, for the demand side, is not too much of a consideration.
Got it. Cool. So we're going to jump into questions in a little bit, because I know we have a few right here in the chat. But is there any kind of, any insights that you want to share with us, based off maybe the past few, I was going to say recent years, but past few months with Airvet?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, I'm still learning a lot. I'm still picking up a lot as I go. I think what I've learned, the biggest insight, and people say this all the time, it's team, right? You're only as strong as your team. Your idea will only get you so far. It's all team. And on one hand, I feel like we know that, but then you start building a company, and as CEOs, you end up doing so much. My biggest advice is that I've learned, and I'm sure there's people on this call that have built bigger companies than I have, so I'm preaching to the choir. But constantly be looking for ways to fire yourself from the millions of things as founders that we have to do. You end up not hiring what you actually need because you don't know that you need them because you're doing them. But that's not scalable. And you're going to find yourself potentially in hot water with your team, that you're doing so much and you're managing so much. Constantly look for ways to fire yourself and bring people on that every single person you trust to feel like. Don't hire people that you then have to micromanage. Then don't hire them if you can't trust them to lead that division or group or project. So hire people better than you and smarter than you in each specific area with more experience, and constantly look for ways to fire yourself, not to compliment yourself per se. So that's what I did. And since I've had that just mental shift, and looking to fire myself from things and hiring people to lead those areas that I trust to do that without needing management, it's opened up so much more of my day and time to focus on the things that actually drive the business forward. And somebody told me once, every day, ask yourself, am I working on my business or in my business? Because as CEOs, we often work so in the business, it's hard to take a step out and make sure that you're going in the right direction, that you have time to focus on things that matter. So I would say making sure you're focusing on the business and not in it, where it's going, how you're getting there, strategy, alliances, investor relations, and hiring. So I think those are big things big takeaways, at least that I've had.
Awesome. I love it. So that's great. So we have one question. I think Jack actually had to hop off. Otherwise, I'd ask him to come on. But he was asking about, so for the Series A, your valuation, and feel free to kind of get as detailed as you want or kind of skip over. But he was asking, how you kind of arrived at that, given that it was so quick and kind of during COVID right now. You don't have to say the exact. You don't have to say the exact number, of course.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, our revenue 30x'd in like 60 days. So we really came up with the valuation, and I think we had a model pre-COVID, right? And that model told us where we were going to be by when and what we would value at that point. And that model went totally out the window when COVID hit. So our revenue literally 30x'd. In a very, very short period of time. And then we ultimately had to ask ourselves, look, we're gonna have to build a whole new model, but we're too busy right now, right? We can't build a whole brand new model and the data is too new. Anything we built then it's brand new. So there was no way to forecast it. So we really had to think through our own comfort levels when it came to dilution, right? We could wait, and we had plenty of capital. I mean, we still had millions of dollars in the bank from our seed. So, and we hadn't really spent a lot of it. I'm very frugal, and I'm a very cheap founder. So we had years of runway still in the bank. So the question we had to ask ourselves was, well, if we could wait and just raise it a much higher valuation in 8 months or a year, whatever it is, or do it now. And if we do it now, what are we comfortable diluting with, and is it with the right partner? That was really the two big things. So we looked at our business, our revenue, looked at comps of other healthcare companies and how quickly they've grown in those valuations, and some are going public, and we spoke to those founders of how they valued the company early on. And then ultimately we found an area that we were comfortable with. The venture firms that we were talking to, it felt like we were in the sweet spot. We probably could have doubled that valuation if we were, but then you run the risk of needing to grow in. It's like, you could be a size 8 shoe. You can buy 11s. Yeah. That's great. You still need to grow, but it's gonna be very uncomfortable. So just a lot more room to grow. So we had to also build a valuation that we felt that when it came time to do our next round or justify that valuation, it was something that we felt we comfortable and confident that we'd exceed. So that's how we thought about it. Whenever raising and thinking about valuations, there's the what can I raise at, and then there's the what should I raise at, and it's not always the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing more on that. So
yeah, and it looks like Manny had a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, Manny, do you want to come on and
Hey, Manny, you're on mute, by the way.
My bad. I was on another call before. Thanks for walking us through Airvet.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting marketplace. I had a question about, because I was reading your TC article, and there was a little bit there about integrations. And I haven't worked for a healthcare company in hardware before. I know the HIPAA. So you kind of touched on not needing the HIPAA compliance. Do you anticipate when it's time to do integrations into EMRs? What kind of pushback do you see there with some of those kind of vets and like adding that extra layer of software as something else they're gonna have to connect
So the good
to their
news,
system?
yeah, the good news is they're the ones demanding it. They're the ones saying, hey, when are you going to hook into my dang EMR so I could start having Airvet and my telemedicine stuff communicate with my normal day-to-day? So actually, if anything, the pushbacks come from our side because we've had so many things to build with very few resources. We've had to prioritize. And that's one of the things because, so that's one half. So no, I don't anticipate any pushback whatsoever from the vast majority of vets because they're the ones demanding it. That we do it. And luckily, there are a couple companies out there that are kind of API, like EMR aggregators, where all the major, so Cornerstone and Avamark, I mean, those two EMRs alone make up like 60+% of the EMRs in the industry. So there are APIs that you can tie in with that will give you access in one integration to all the major EMRs.
Okay, that makes things more streamlined then, yeah.
So much more streamlined, yeah, and which is obviously not the case on the human side because of HIPAA. We just one integration and you're basically tied in with everyone.
And sorry, another quick question. I guess since you're kind of in a totally different industry, but still in sort of healthcare-ish, do you kind of see that API push also going into major like patient care, I guess?
So you mean communicating with the clients and directly? Yeah, absolutely. We have big plans on how we're going to help with just general client communication as well. Now that we're tied in with the EMRs, there's going to be a lot of information that we have that we don't need to store because it's all coming through the API. So we don't need to store it. We can set up flags and alerts and things like that. That will push content via email, text message, and again, because there's no HIPAA compliance, we have a lot more freedom on what we can do. But I think client communications is going to be a big piece for the business because again, it's kind of before as you look at the whole customer journey and then you ask yourself like, how much of this can I create value in? And that's definitely one of the areas.
All right, thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, good question.
Awesome. Hey, Dan, did you want to come on?
Sorry, I actually didn't have any questions. I'm forced to do like 3 things at the same time right now, but this is fantastic, Brandon. And I share a filmic background with you. I worked at Columbia TriStar, Sony for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, I did a very brief internship at Happy Madison.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Oh,
that was a lot of fun. It's a great lot. I like it over there.
Yeah, yeah. But it's incredibly impressive what you're doing, and thank you for the wonderful share.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Thanks for listening. I'm already sick of my own voice. I can't imagine you guys aren't also.
You're really generous. This is fantastic stuff. Thank you.
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear it.
I'm gonna hop off.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. We got hey Juan, did you want to hop on with that question?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate the interview for sure.
Sure.
I had 2 questions. Any insights on raising your pre-seed, and then how did you get your initial customers on board?
So pre-seed, I think for me, the pre-seed is always, in my experience, has been just about relationships and reputation. Because really what a pre-seed is people saying, look, sounds cool, but like, I'm really betting on you.
Let's
Right?
take a
At this
bet. Yeah.
stage. So for me, at least, and I can't say this is a general rule, but for me, that was all about relationships. So a lot of the investors that I had in the network that I just had relationships with, those would be the first person people I'd reach out to are people that already know you and your work ethic and your ability to do things that are entrepreneurial and just believe in you. So that's at least what I've experienced is just people you had pre-existing relationships with who will bet on you. That's that. And then remind me your second question. Oh, early customers.
That's it.
So you remember with Nintendo, up, up, down, down, A, B, left, right, the cheat code?
Is that Contra?
So what was it? I can't even remember. Was it golden? I can't even remember.
Yeah,
But,
yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
So I had a bit of a cheat code, which is my dad. My dad has been in the space for a long time, and he was
very nice.
a very big name in the space. So for us, that was a bit of an unfair advantage. So getting our first clients on board was really a matter of, my dad making some introductions, and medicine is a very skeptical industry, right? I don't know if you work in the medical field. It's very skeptical of new technologies, new entrants, particularly people who are not doctors or were doctors. So immediately by having someone on our team who has been in the space and had a strong reputation, that trust barrier is already gone. So they make a few phone calls and introductions. Obviously, you need to take it from there and sell it through and all that. But getting our first few was a matter of getting to the right people, introduced for somebody that already had trust established that would come in, and also being innovative. Your early partners have to have an interest, at least an interest in what you're doing, because having early partners that you convince and sell into that then don't use the product because they didn't really have an interest to begin with are going to mess your numbers up and ruin your product.
That's right.
So, for example, we didn't want to choose any hospitals that still did paper records, because what that shows is you're sitting here talking about telemedicine, but you're still doing paper records. Like you're not the early partner for us. Yeah. So finding alignments there, people that are all digital within their practice, and people that had high volume of cases. So that they're, so that's how we chose it. We just look for strategic alignments, and then my little cheat code with my dad making some good introductions through established relationships.
Very nice. Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Cool. So, hey, Carlos, did you want to come on for that question?
Hey, can you guys hear me? Let me see if I can. Sorry, I was closed. What's going on, Brandon? How's it going?
Hey, how are you, Carlos?
Good. Good to hear another Southern California person.
All right. Yeah.
Fight on. Not
love
a choice,
it.
So quick question. So you talked a little bit about it just now, but about the pricing model. So I'm just kind of curious, how did you kind of arrive to that initial pricing model? Like what were some of the practices that you use or that feedback? And then also, did you receive like any pushback initially? Obviously you want to sell something that people are willing to pay. So just curious around your thoughts of how you kind of got those first few customers, paid customers.
Yeah. So I would tell you this, we underpriced it at first. I don't think we did enough homework, not because obviously we're lazy, but we had a billion priorities and we needed to get something out. So a little bit, it was just kind of market sensitivity testing. So you work with your first few and you find out, hey, if I'm charging you, $75 a month, but I'm bringing you $8,000 in additional revenue, like is $75 a month, like, is that on par, or am I creating much more value for you? And are you willing to pay for that value, right? Would you pay $500 a month if I could bring you 8,000 in additional and incremental revenue? So I think it's all a matter of price sensitivity testing. And then also talking to partners. They will be oftentimes the first to tell you what they would pay for something. So you get your first early case studies. And let's say we found that we could, on average, this is just going to made up numbers, we can save on average per month, 20 hours per veterinarian, because the in-person visit is 20 to 30 minutes, telemedicine visits 5 minutes. So, and they're charging the same thing, right? So if I could save each doctor, right, 20 hours a month per doctor in time, and I can make, and I can drive $8,000 to $10,000 in additional revenue per month, what would you pay for a technology like that? They'll tell you, and they'll give you a range, like, oh, for that, I'd probably pay this to that. And then you also look at other platforms, not competitive platforms per se, but finding hospitals that used other third-party technologies, whether it was for reminder systems, whether it was for practice management systems. You can very quickly typically get a sense of what is their like comfort level in paying for third party. So if they have 5 third-party systems, and each one they're paying anywhere from $99 a month to $199, that's not a huge range. And you get a sense of, if I charged $499, even if I could provide the value, like that's going to seem exorbitant to them. It's more than everything else. So for us, it's just a lot of homework, right? It's looking at what value you're actually driving, making sure they understand that value, asking them what they'd pay for it, and then looking at other things that they're already paying for, and trying to establish some type of a comfort baseline of what they're doing, and then go out and actually see that. And of course, the obvious, look at your competitors, what are they charging, and then not to use that as a rule, because if you have a much better product, you should charge more for it. But ultimately, that takes time for people to see. If you're going to charge more for a product right out of the gate, but it's going to take 6 months for them to get trained and see the value, maybe you give it away for free for a couple of months. Maybe you underprice it for the first 6 months of the contract, and then it goes up once they've seen the value. So that's kind of how we looked at pricing. And it's still evolving, but that's how we look originally when we set the pricing. That's how we did it.
Okay.
What do you think? Have you had experience in figuring out early pricing models too?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm kind of working on right now. It was trying to figure out how to actually charge it. I think the biggest thing was kind of to your point, what you were just saying. So my marketplace is renting out athletic space for people who want to rent out like gym equipment, things of that nature. So they would instead of doing like they typically tend to book space on a yearly contract. So essentially, like we're charging them. How much do we charge them for that yearly contract, right? Because if I'm coming to a gym owner and I say, hey, this person wants to rent out your space, I don't want to do it just off one booking, but I want to do it off like the entire contract. So it's trying to figure out how much are they willing to pay for my service to bring in those like qualified leads, and say, hey, I can bring you, $10,000 a year, whatever it might be. And trying to figure out what that pricing structure looks like. So that's been the biggest challenge. And then, like you said, just trying to talk to them, see, how much they're willing to pay for it, but just trying to find that balance.
Yeah. I could hook you up with some gym owners too, if that would be helpful. You can ping me after this and I can set you up with a guy who owns a whole bunch of gyms. If you already know through some type of case study that you could drive $10,000 a year in additional signups, you can start by saying, hey, if I could drive you $10,000 a year in signups, what would you pay for that $10,000? And not to say that you'd have to do whatever they'd ask, but if you asked 10 gym owners and you start to get the same, everyone tells you, between 500 and 750, like that's what everyone tells you, that range, you're kind of getting the market appetite there.
Okay, cool. No, that's super helpful. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. So I'll connect with you after.
Yeah.
But that's very insightful stuff. I appreciate taking the time to jump in.
Thank you. Too kind.
Yeah, thanks.
That's a good question. Hey, so on that note, Brandon, is there a variance as far as like the pricing for maybe that you're thinking about subscription based off of, is it maybe I would say like the specific kind of segment of the supply, maybe like, they might have a lower frequency as far as, the bookings versus some of the larger?
We're still figuring that out.
Yeah.
We're asking ourselves the same question that you just asked. So it's still a little up in the air on how we're thinking about subscription. And we don't have enough I don't have enough of a pulse yet to be able to answer that one, unfortunately. But I think in 60 days, I'd probably have a pretty good answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just pretend I gave that good answer now.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as like the variance, you know, with the veterinarians, is there like a large variance in that, or is it like you can pretty much kind of have a few typical kind of use cases on that?
So it's interesting. The average pet owner only goes to the vet 1.5 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
And 50% of pets won't be seen by a vet this year.
Wow.
So there's the average, right? But then there's the fact that, and this is true for most things, but 20% of the clients within a vet hospital account for 80% of their revenue.
Wow.
So those 20%, there would be a huge variance between the other 80%, but the 80% is the majority. Even though they are not representing the real business there. So the question is, how do we think about building things for the 20%? That's different than the 80%, because clearly they have very different behaviors, even though they're all clients of a hospital, right? You can't look at clients, let alone people say, well, client behaviors in some regions. I'm always like, some regions? Like, not only is regions too broad, not only is state too broad, not only is city, it's even to say one hospital is too broad, because you have such different behaviors within the client base of just one hospital. So it's a matter of figuring out those variances within a group that small that have huge impact on the bottom line of the business, and treating those groups differently. So that's what we're figuring out now, is exactly that. It is looking at the behaviors of the 20% that are accounting for 80% of the revenue, and then looking at that 80% and saying, okay, clearly their behaviors are different. Clearly they treat their pets a little bit differently. Maybe not that they treat them worse, but maybe they get most of their information online in like a Google search or a Facebook group, versus the parents who are like, oh my God, my dog just farted, I need to go to the vet, right? Every little thing, right? They're very different. So how do you communicate your value as a platform differently within the hospital to those segments? So that's what we're looking at now and trying to figure out.
Got it. Awesome. Cool. And then I think we're kind of almost out of time in a little bit, but is there, based off some of the questions that we're all asking, is there anything that you kind of wanted to leave us with?
To be honest, these have been great questions. I would say the only thing that I would leave with is something that I wish I had done better, which is let the market dictate what your product is. Even if you know the market, even if you're an expert in the market, even if you're the number one expert in the world in that market, you're going to think that you know best. Like, I know everything, I understand it all, I'm going to build the tools and it's going to work this way and that way. One of the things we learned, luckily, very, very early was, at first when we built Airvet, it was very restrictive. Like, it was set fees for consults for the hospitals. They didn't have a lot of flexibility in how they were going to use it, because we thought we had built the best way for them to use it. And if they adopted it, they would see huge results. But in the end of the day, one by one, we started removing the restrictions. It's like, oh, now you could set your own price, or, oh, now you can, oh, you want desktop, instead of trying to convince you that mobile is a much better experience. Like, we'll build you desktop if that's clearly what you want. So luckily, it's still very early for us. We've only been in the market for 10 months, right? So it's still super early. We learned that early, but I wish even earlier. I wish I had built the product that was only based on how our partners on the supply side, at least, want to use it, and the demand side, versus how we thought would be the best way for them to adopt and leverage telemedicine. No matter how much knowledge you have, let the market dictate what you build and how you build it. Doesn't mean take every single idea that they have and build it, but try to get a sense of how everybody wants to use your product, and then build what they want, as opposed to building the things that you think would be best, or maybe even things that are better. There's still that jump they have to make, and sometimes that jump takes a year, and sometimes it takes 2, where you can ultimately get them to where you want, but start with what they want.
Yeah, That's awesome. I mean, I don't think we could end it at a better note. So
Perfect.
so where can we keep up with you and follow you in Airvet?
Let's see. I mean, I'm in the group, so you can follow me and chat with me anytime. But Airvet, probably just I would say for anyone who has pets, I would say download the app. It's a free app, and right now just use it if and when you need it. It's always better to have it and have it ready when you need it, as opposed to needing it and then going, oh, now I got to download this app and sign up. So I would say for those who have pets, you can download the app and sign up. And otherwise, Facebook, Instagram, and all that. We're not huge on social. We don't do a ton of social yet. But for the second half of the year, we're going to do a lot more. But that's probably the best place. Maybe a few articles and PR. You'll catch us here and there. Where we just did a Forbes article, or we're in Forbes for something. So yeah, well, you'll see our names pop up.
Awesome, cool. Well, I'll link to it all in the description of this too.
Cool.
So yeah, thanks again for taking the time. This is super insightful. So I appreciate it, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, likewise.
All right.
It was a ton of fun, and enjoy being part of the group.
All right, see you everyone.
Thanks, guys.